Hey friends, so I'm making this video today to show you guys how to propagate succulents successfully. So I'm going to start talking about just like basic things like leaf detachment, watering, soil type, lighting, all of that stuff. So yeah, I just want to start by talking about leaf propagation because that's where I get the most questions from people. So I think the most important part of leaf propagation is going to be your detachment. So when you're taking a plant and you're detaching leaves, you want to make sure you hear a snap or you're peeling it enough where you get some of the stem with it. So I like to either like wiggle it or pull it down. So you just grab your two fingers, you grab it right here next to the node, and you can kind of hear that snap and see this peel if you listen closely. And you want to do this without damaging the leaf. That's the most important part. So once you have your leaves prepared, which I have just a ton of them from work that need to go into a tray, I will take my leaves and I will just stick them on a tray like this one. So I fill it with soil. The soil I like to use is this Miracle-Gro mix. I know a lot of people will use like peat and pumice or just pumice by itself or peat and perlite. So anything that's well draining is gonna work out the best. So once you filled your tray or you decide you don't want to fill your tray, then you just kind of stick them in like a windowsill or something. That's what I used to do. But I personally prefer starting them in soil already because it helps the plant or the new rosette anchor down and then have a way for me to water them successfully as well. So I'll lay them here and then I just stick them back in my greenhouse. But if you don't have a greenhouse or grow lights, then you want to mimic the same environment in which that the mom plant is in. So for example, if it's already in a windowsill, your plant is, then take off the leaves and just stick them in that same windowsill. Just line them up, toss them in a pile, whatever you want to do, or stick them back on the soil from the same pot that the mom plant is in. So also too, a big question that people ask me is how long does it take for the plant to grow new roots? And that is honestly completely dependent upon the plant. So for my pot of like ghost babies, I started these a few months ago and they're already to this size, whereas for my Lolas, I started these about a year ago and they're only this size. So you have to be patient and it's really dependent upon the plant. So once you have your leaves detached and you have them laid down and stuff, just leave them alone, and then once new roots start to form, so my Opalina babies now have roots, this is when I begin to water them. And I'm not misting them, which you can do, that's totally fine and up to you, but I just treat them like I would any of my other succulent plants. So I separate the rooted from non-rooted in my trays, and then I just take my watering can and heavily water them until the soil is saturated, and then I leave them alone again until the soil is dry to the touch. So a common misconception people have about succulents and cacti is that because they don't need a lot of water, that means that you water them in little amounts throughout like a few days. Like someone will take a tablespoon and just pour a tablespoon of water onto their plant and then do the same thing again in like a few days, when realistically you should be drenching them and leaving them alone again until the soil is dry to the touch. So you have to think like desert plant, okay, they're dry for a long time, then they get a heavy rainfall, and then there's nothing again for a while. So you want to mimic that. I think that watering is the most important part. It's a way to not get rot and all the above. So I don't do anything to my succulent leaves before they have roots. There is no purpose, there's no water intake, there's no reason for me to be watering them. The succulent plant itself has enough water in its leaf to sustain its life. So that is how you do that. So once you have roots, you're starting to water, you have it in whatever lighting that you took the leaves from, then you're gonna wanna transplant at some point. So for these, I transplanted these when they were a little bit smaller. I just made them into this mandala shape. Oh boy. Anyway, bear with my awkwardness in this video. It's totally fine. So for that, I just kind of like stuck them in there, waiting for them to root. They're newly transplanted, so that's why they're not exactly stable. But I do have this other one as well that's more stable. These have been in here for quite some time, so you can see they still have the leaves on them. A lot of people will attempt to pull the drying leaf off of the mother succulent, which can be successful for some, but also it's a way to lose all of your roots, so that can be bad. So for example, this one right here, you can see the leaf is dying off from the rosette, but I'm still not going to try and detach that. I'm gonna let it fall off naturally. But that's up to you. You know, I like to play it safe, and I don't want to lose the roots and all the time and effort I've spent waiting for this moment. So for transplanting, like I said, use a well-draining soil. I will just fill up a pot and find some leaves in my propagation that I think are ready to be transplanted. Like I said, I've got tons of leaves down here. Let's see if I can find some good ones. So this is a pretty good one. I just will take my plant and stick it right on top of the soil. See, I'll show you guys an overhead view too here in just a second. But yeah, as soon as it's got like a good root system on it, I'd say it's a good time to transplant. It's completely up to you when you want to. So you can wait until the rosettes are bigger, you can wait until the leaf has fallen off, whatever you want. So for this one, for example, this leaf fell off. You can go ahead and transplant it, but it's up to you. And if you already have them started in soil, you can let them just grow until they're fairly big until you want them to be transplanted. So for example, this is my tray of transplants. A lot of these leaves have fallen off already, and I have large plants in here just ready to be transplanted into anything. So that's kind of why I like to use the soil method, because I don't have a lot of time. So for me, it ensures that they're still in a good environment, they've got soil, they can be watered properly, and I don't have to worry too much about it. But what you want to do is completely up to you. There's no right or wrong. So yeah, then that's how you would transplant, and then eventually you'll end up with a bunch of huge plants. So here is one of my favorite propagation that I've done. This is my favorite pot. I started all of these from leaves, and yeah, so I just arranged them in here as they were small, and then they grew into bigger plants, obviously. So that's how you do that. Also, another way to propagate succulents is from cuttings. So I have this aeonium here, and as I was moving, I accidentally beheaded it. Yeah, so you can just go back and snip the plants off like this. And then I still have this big main one, which will eventually form new plants on it. I don't know if you can see it or not, but on the stem on top, you can see that there's new babies coming off. So I can propagate those eventually too once they're big enough. Oh yeah, I don't know if I showed you guys an overhead of, here you go. So this is just kind of what it looks like after you transplant them. You just want to stick them in there. There's really not much to it. Just cover the roots, you know, make a little hole and start watering them as normal. But yeah, anyway, so where did all my little babies go? Here they are. Okay. So when it comes to taking cuttings like this, the wounds at the bottoms are going to be fairly open. So I wait 3 days for them to callus over. During this time, I kind of just let them sit straight up somewhere or lay them down. That's up to you. But just watch it so the plant doesn't start like moving with the sun. You want to maintain it as a straight plant. I don't know if that made a lot of sense, but so for example, plants move within their light. So if I have it laying down, then eventually the stem might start to curl up so the rosette is standing towards, or like sitting towards the ceiling instead of just like maintaining its shape like this. So when I do put it straight up, it's normal, it would be bent then. So just kind of watch for that if that made sense. So yeah, then you wait a little bit. And if you have like an oxen powder, which I do have, I typically don't use it though, you can dip it in there and then just immediately stick it into some soil. But by sticking it in soil right away, it's likely that the stem is gonna rot and your propagation won't be successful. So you're gonna want to remove a few leaves from the nodes. In the case of this aeonium, there's a ton of nodes that are open and showing. So a node is where the leaf is detached to the stem. That's a node. So you want to take your plant and bury it pretty deep so those nodes are covered by soil. The reason for that is when a node comes in contact with soil, adventitious roots begin to form, so then your new root system is going to form this way. So yeah, you would just go ahead and remove some of them. You can cut it back if you want and then stick it in the soil after 3 days. And that's how I've done a lot of my successful cuttings from here. So that's how you do that. Yeah, there's really not much more to succulent propagation other than basic things like that. So hopefully that answers some of your questions. Detachment is the most important part. Definitely just leave your succulent leaves alone until you start seeing root growth. And then at that point you can begin either misting or watering them. And then after that, transplanting is completely up to you, whatever size rosette you feel is necessary. Just make sure your soil is well draining. Fill up a pot, make a little hole, stick the rosette in there with its leaf and the root system, and then water it as normal. Watering it as you're filling the pot up, letting it drain off out of the bottom, and then nothing again until the soil is completely dry to the touch. And that should give you successful propagation. If you're doing cuttings, make sure you're letting them callus over for 3 days. If you're using a rooting powder, then go ahead and stick it right in the soil. But wait 3 days, stick it in, and then I like to, for that, this is important. So I like to have moist soil already when I'm taking my cuttings and sticking it in, because that water is going to make a huge difference for the soil, the node, and the root formation. So I like to do that. I won't just stick it in dry soil. And then I wait at least a week, and then I water it as normal, and then I just check for roots to start forming. So I'll pull it a little bit, see if there's some sort of like anchorage happening. You can usually tell. It becomes a little bit more difficult, but don't be too harsh because you don't want to ruin the new root system. So yeah, that's the basis of it. Just water succulents as normal. For lighting, I keep my plants in my greenhouse, so for me lighting is a little bit different. I use grow lights. But if you're propagating from like a plant in your windowsill, you're gonna wanna keep the same kind of lighting as that windowsill is during propagation. So just be consistent. I think that's the most important part, and that should give you successful propagation. So yeah, I hope this video answered those questions for you guys. If there's anything else I can do for you, please feel free to send me a DM or leave a comment below in the comment section. Thank you.